Hello, let's talk about the zone of proximal development. This video is for teachers, student teachers, and parents. Parents, as we conduct home-based learning, I remind you to always keep your child's zone of proximal development in mind. As you assist your child with the lessons teachers send, ask your child questions and encourage your child to ask questions, just as the teacher would have done if the child was in the classroom. Teachers, as you plan lessons guided by technical documents such as your unit plan or their curriculum, please keep your students' zone of proximal development in mind, always. This is crucial to motivate them and promote their learning. Here, I created some visuals for you to view while I explain Vygotsky's zone of proximal development. Before I begin, here are two excellent books I must mention since the information I will be sharing comes from these two books. The first book is Lev Vygotsky's Thought and Language, and the second book is Johnson and Kerr's Catching Readers Before They Fall. Excellent books. Now let's answer the questions. Why should educational stakeholders know about the zone of proximal development? Educational stakeholders should know about the zone of proximal development because it should trigger a mental shift in teaching. It should impact planning for students. It should inform the way we instruct students. And it should enforce the use of intentional language with students. Let's dive into it. The zone of proximal development, ZPD for short, is a sociocultural theory of cognitive development brought forth by the Russian psychologist Lev Vygotsky. This theory refers to students and the delicate and complex situation of students' learning. Vygotsky knew that children need us to be their advocates. Let's look at the blue inner circle. That is the zone of actual development, ZAD. That is where your students are. These blue arrows pointing towards a child indicate the intentional language teachers use that later becomes that child's private and inner speech. The arrows pointing away from the child are the questions and interactions children have with their teacher. The zone of actual development is a healthy present state of a student. Every student exists in their zone of actual development. Every good teacher should know the ability or the actual development of a child, what that child knows about the content, and what that child is ready to learn. Children come in with many abilities. This requires teachers to evaluate or diagnose what the child can actually do without assistance. For example, in the case of literacy, it includes all the skills and strategies the child knows and can apply to reading at his or her level. Every pupil is different. The zone of actual development encompasses the schema stored in the form of previous knowledge gained by the child. This previous knowledge can be experiences, such as a trip to an orange juice factory, or knowing how to use Scratch to create their own games. It can also be background knowledge, which is any knowledge acquired through reading and content area studies. And it could also be cultural wealth, any knowledge gained by being a part of a cultural group. It is important to know that children hold attitudes, opinions, and feelings towards all these memory files. Therefore, it is important for teachers to tap into these resources. What happens when children are given tasks that are out of their reach? They may easily get confused, frustrated, question their intelligence, and over time develop conditions that may diminish their interest in the subject. And if it is the language arts subject, this can affect the child's interest in school, since all content areas are instructed in English and entail reading and comprehension of textbook materials. If a teacher just writes a lesson without considering the student's zone of proximal development, which is the green middle circle here that represents the potential to grow, he or she could be harming instead of arming the child with the necessary tools for success. It is good to remember that the best teaching happens when you are working within the child's zone of proximal development. We should not fit the curriculum into the child, instead fit the child into the curriculum. Johnson and Kerr ask, can teaching exist without learning? We have had many times when we thought we were teaching our hearts out, only to realize that nothing much sunk into the child's brains. Most would blame the child. Instead, we must ask, did we teach within the child's zone of proximal development? Did the child learn new knowledge, competence, or virtue? Here is a debate question to consider for in-class discussion. Can teaching exist without learning? Let's now focus on the zone of proximal development, which is this green area in the middle. The green circle in the middle is a complex and delicate area that teachers need to consider when planning lessons. The teacher's language needs to be intentional and strategies need to be explicit. Remember, children pick up the language used in their social milieu, so that is called social speech, the child or the student's social speech. And it is promoted and encouraged by the teacher. So the first dot represents the teacher coming in with her new lesson to impart new knowledge. This has to be done with intentional language and strategies, modeling explicit language and modeling the target strategy and all of that, and all the opportunities that come with practice at that first stage. Do you remember the movie The Karate Kid with Mr. Miyagi? Do you remember Daniel's first lesson from Mr. Miyagi? Daniel was perplexed when Mr. Miyagi just told him that he has some activities for him to do and to keep saying wax on and wax off with hand movements. Mr. Miyagi knew the importance of intentional language. Wax on, wax off is the intentional language, while the hand movements was the strategy. We need to provide practice opportunities, ample practice opportunities until a gradual release of responsibility from the teacher to student happens. We still need to be guiding them throughout. So many ways a teacher can model explicit language, such as think aloud strategy, the question strategy. All of this will nurture and develop the social speech that child is acquiring. The second dot is collaborative work. Yes, teachers need to have their demonstration and talk time, but students need to be given the opportunity to be in strategic groups so they can help each other to practice what was modeled by the teacher. Strategic group work fosters many good behaviors in students and in teachers. It is an opportunity for teachers to heavily monitor the student learning, to heavily monitor who needs help, to heavily monitor whether the strategy is working, to heavily monitor whether the topic is being learned, to heavily monitor if the student's language is specific, if it's the intentional language she wants them to learn. This is nurturing social speech. Yes, have students use words. Yes, have students use the words you use. You got those words from textbook and you want students to know the textbook language. If you use the language often and enforce it, they will use it too. No word is too long or too complicated for children. Sometimes we limit students by thinking that they're not ready yet. So remember, peer work is important to emphasize on social speech. Now the third dot here is almost near the zone of actual development, but not there yet. Here teachers need to provide more practice. This independent practice allows teachers to evaluate students individually to tell if the child has arrived at the zone of actual development or need more practice to do the work independently. If that child has achieved metacognition and so forth. This independent practice also promotes social speech to develop further into private speech. Private speech is necessary for self-directing, so that child direct him or herself to knowing what to do. Have you ever found yourself repeating some instructions when doing something you are not yet capable of doing entirely automatically? Well, it is healthy when you keep repeating those instructions because that private speech will move into inner speech. And if the child now uses inner speech, then Vygotsky says that child has now learned or acquired the content, because it becomes automatic thought. And many psychologists and counselors also encourage us to Make sure we have some self-talk, self-direct every morning in the mirror so we can influence the way we think and the things we do. So here are some caveats to consider. Students who keep getting work within their zone of actual development, where they constantly use the same skills and strategies they already have control over, may become unanimated, uninterested, find interest elsewhere, or get comfortable or stuck in their comfort zone. This is a delicate balance that if the teacher fails to monitor the learning process of the child, it can lead to learning apathy or failure. The child is left behind or drops out of school if this happens regularly. This sounds like a slippery slope, but this is the reality of our Belizean students. Teachers need to be careful of practice work. The practice is when the student already knows the concept. This is zone of actual development where they can do tasks independently, and the work is done for emphasis or just to keep them busy. For example, when there are sports day or other activities. But instruction is teaching a new concept. The zone of proximal development can be visualized as delicate instruction time, a training time of students with genuine and careful help from the teacher to gain new skills, strategies, and experiences in learning. Once teachers know their students' individual zone of actual development, then they can plan for lessons that are out of reach, students don't know yet, to the zone of proximal development to their zone of actual development. Learning is an ongoing process. If instructors or teachers use the zone of proximal development with intentional language to teach their students, this will help them to teach English as a second language instead of first language. This will also help teachers support English language learners. This will also shape teachers' attitudes, opinions, and feelings to using culturally relevant pedagogy. This will also promote the psychology of using explicit and positive intentional language in the classroom. This will also foster reflective teaching where teachers go back after teaching a lesson and reflect on what strategy worked, which strategy did work, what needs to be modified, or does the lesson need to be taught all over with revisions. This also helps teachers to lower the failure rate in the classroom, to lessen the labeling of students, and knowing about the zone of proximal development also helps teachers to get to know their student. Based on Vygotsky's teaching, language is a central tool to get the child from out of reach to the zone of proximal development to the zone of actual development. Peter Johnson, author of the book How Our Language Affects Children's Learning, once said, "Talk is a central tool of teachers' trade. With it, they mediate children's activities and experiences and help them make sense of learning, literacy, life, and themselves." Do we need to give English language learners more time to process what they learn, what they hear, what they read? Of course. Does that mean that they are slow or cognitively impaired? No. It means that children whose native language is not English, when placed in a classroom where English is the language of instruction, the brain is stimulated a lot more, trying to multitask to make sense of the new language, the communication, the strategy, the topic, the instructions. They're organizing information, processing it as what information they understand and what is new in order to learn the task at hand. That is a complex yet delicate situation students find themselves in every day in our classrooms. And knowing about the zone of proximal development, this sociocultural theory of cognitive development, will help teachers to facilitate student learning in the classroom. I am going to end by sharing these two quotes. This quote is relevant for our students, primary school, high school, and even at the tertiary level. They are who they are. They know what they know. They bring what they bring. Therefore, always ask them, what is it that they know and what is it that they want to know? And then you help them through that zone of proximal development to get them to take the students from where they are and move them forward from there. This sums up the zone of proximal development. Thank you for listening. And if you have any new topics, any questions, please let me know. And these are my references. Thank you for listening.